Las Vegas, July 1968. A Saturday night at the Desert Inn was supposed to be predictable, almost mechanical in its perfection. High rollers drifted between baccarat tables. Celebrities gathered at the bar, their laughter mixing with the low hum of slot machines. In the showroom, every seat was filled, anticipation hanging in the air like cigarette smoke beneath the low ceiling. At exactly 11:01 p.m., Dean Martin was scheduled to walk on stage. For Dean, this should have been routine. Las Vegas was practically a second home. He performed here dozens of times a year, knew the rhythm of the city, understood its unspoken rules. You sang, you smiled, you collected your check, and you didn't ask questions about who really owned the building you were standing in. But this night wasn't routine, because seated in the front row where power liked to announce itself sat Vincent "Vinny" Martell, a Chicago mob boss whose influence stretched far beyond the Midwest. Vinny wasn't just connected. He controlled unions, ran gambling operations, and quietly held stakes in legitimate businesses. Restaurants, construction companies, supply chains that looked clean on paper and rotten underneath. He was in Las Vegas for meetings that couldn't happen over the phone, meetings that required closed doors, guarded rooms, and men who didn't leave records behind. And like many men drunk on power, Vinny wanted to be seen. Sitting front row at the hottest show on the Strip was a statement. I'm here. I matter. I own space. Even when I don't own the room. Dean knew exactly who he was. Everyone in Vegas did. You couldn't work this city without knowing who to avoid, who to respect, and who never heard the word no. Dean had always walked that line carefully. He performed in mob-owned casinos, took their money, but he kept his distance. No favors, no debts, no late-night drinks. Others weren't so lucky. Frank Sinatra had complicated ties. Sammy Davis Jr. had borrowed money. But Dean stayed clean, professional, separate, until that night. 3 years earlier, in 1965, Dean's older brother Bill had died suddenly. A heart attack at just 56. Dean rarely spoke about it publicly. Grief to him was private. Family was sacred. But in Las Vegas, nothing stayed private for long. Information traveled, and certain men listened carefully. Dean was in his dressing room, going through his familiar pre-show ritual, when there was a knock. "Come in." A sharply dressed man entered, one of Vinny's associates. "Mr. Martell would like to say hello before the show." Dean set his drink down slowly. "Tell Mr. Martell I appreciate the thought, but I'm preparing. I'll see him after. He's in the front row. He'd like to see you now." It wasn't a request. Dean understood that immediately. When men like Vinny sent someone to fetch you, you went, or you created an enemy you didn't want. "5 minutes, Dean said, standing. "That's all I have." Backstage corridors gave way to the hallway near the showroom entrance. There stood Vinny, short, thick through the middle, slicked back hair, cigar burning between his fingers. 4 men flanked him, the kind who didn't need to speak to make threats clear. "Dean Martin," Vinny boomed. "The King of Vegas." They shook hands. Vinny's grip was firm. Too firm. A handshake meant to establish dominance. "I wanted to say hello before your show," Vinny said. "We're both Italian boys, right? From the old neighborhood." Dean smiled politely. "Different neighborhoods." Vinny chuckled, puffed his cigar. "I knew your family back in Steubenville. Your old man's barbershop. Good man, hard worker." Dean's expression didn't change. "And you had a brother," Vinny continued casually. "Older brother. Willie? Bill?" Something cold passed through Dean's chest. "Bill," he said. "Yeah, I heard he died. Heart attack. That's rough. Losing family, it's the worst." A pause, calculated. "How old was he?" 56. "Too young," Vinny said, shaking his head. "You know what probably did it? Stress, living in your shadow. That kind of resentment eats at a man. Literally eats his heart." One of Vinny's men laughed. Dean went very still. "That's a terrible thing to say," he said quietly. "I'm just being honest," Vinny replied. "No," Dean said. "You're being cruel." The air shifted. The hallway fell silent. "You're making jokes about my dead brother," Dean continued, voice calm but razor sharp, "suggesting he died because he was jealous of me. You didn't know him. You never met him. Vinny stepped closer. You got some nerve, Martin. I know exactly who you are, Dean replied, and I'm telling you to stop. You don't tell me to stop. Dean didn't raise his voice. I will when you disrespect my family. Vinny leaned in. Your brother was nobody. He died a nobody. Every instinct in Dean screamed to swing, to end this with his fists. He didn't. Instead, he said softly, I'm giving you one chance. Apologize. Right now. Vinny laughed. You think you can threaten me? I'm not threatening you, Dean said. I'm promising you. If you don't apologize, I will walk on stage and tell everyone exactly what you just said. I'll point you out. I'll make sure they know who you are. The smile vanished from Vinny's face. 30 seconds passed. Finally, through clenched teeth, Vinny said, I apologize. Say his name, Dean said. Bill. Dean nodded. Good. Enjoy the show. Minutes later, the curtain opened. The spotlight hit Dean Martin, and for the next 90 minutes, he performed flawlessly, singing, joking, charming the room, while the most dangerous man in the front row sat stone-faced, humiliated in silence. When the curtain closed, the applause still echoed through the Desert Inn showroom. For the audience, it had been another flawless Dean Martin performance. Effortless charm, perfect timing, a master at work. No one suspected that just minutes earlier, the calm man on stage had stared down one of the most dangerous figures in Las Vegas. Dean didn't linger. He skipped the usual handshakes, the congratulatory backslaps, and went straight to his dressing room. The door closed behind him, and only then did his hands begin to shake. Not from fear, but from rage. White-hot, tightly contained rage. The kind that doesn't burn out quickly. A knock. His stage manager stepped inside, face pale. Dean, there's a problem. What kind of problem? Vinny Martell is telling people you disrespected him, that you threatened him. His guys are spreading it all over the casino. Dean poured himself a drink. Steady hands now. Let them. This isn't some drunk tourist, the manager whispered. He's connected. I know exactly who he is, Dean said, and I don't care. The manager hesitated. You could have just ignored him. Dean turned. His voice was quiet, immovable. He made jokes about my brother. Nobody does that. Not him. Not anyone. The manager left, knowing the argument was over. Later that night, Dean sat alone thinking about Bill, 7 years older, the one who taught him how to box, how to stand up to bullies, how to be steady when things got hard. Bill had worked the steel mills. A regular life. No spotlight, no envy. Just pride in his little brother's success. Vinny had gotten it wrong in every possible way. The next morning, the phone rang. It was Frank Sinatra. Dean, what the hell happened last night? Dean didn't pretend. He told him everything. The hallway, the comments, the apology. There was silence on the other end. About Bill? Frank finally said. Your brother? Yes. Frank exhaled sharply. That son of a... Dean, I would have killed him. I thought about it. But you didn't. You made him apologize. Frank paused. That might have been worse for him. He deserved it. I don't disagree, Frank said carefully. But Vinny doesn't forget humiliation, especially not in front of his own men. I'm not backing down, Dean said. Not on this. Frank sighed. Let me make some calls. Just smooth it over. No, Dean replied. I don't want it smoothed over. I want him to understand there are lines you don't cross. 2 days later, a stranger appeared at Dean's house. Well-dressed, polite, dangerous in a quiet way. My name is Anthony Cerno, the man said. I'm from New York. Dean didn't invite him inside. I'm here regarding the situation at the Desert Inn. There is no situation, Dean replied. I asked for an apology. I got one. Mr. Martell feels it was extracted. I gave him a choice. Cerno smiled thinly. Men like Vinny don't apologize. When they do, it costs them, makes them look weak. That's not my problem. It becomes your problem, Cerno said gently, when weakness invites retaliation. Dean held his gaze. Is that a threat? It's reality. Cerno asked for peace, for silence, for Dean to let it go. Dean agreed, on one condition. Vinny never mentions my brother again. Ever. If he does, all bets are off. Cerno nodded. I'll pass it along. As he left, the weight settled in. Dean had stood his ground, but now the machinery of the mob had turned its attention toward containment. That night, Dean's daughter Dina came to see him. "You're thinking about Uncle Bill," she said. Dean froze. "How did you know?" "You always look like this when you miss him." She hugged him. "I'm proud of you." That mattered more than any apology. Weeks passed. Vinny left Vegas. The story stayed off the front pages, but whispered through back rooms and private offices. Then 6 months later, Dean heard Vinny was back in town. And this time, Vinny wanted to talk again. 6 months after the night at the Desert Inn, Las Vegas had moved on, as it always did. New money flowed in, old rumors faded, and neon lights kept glowing as if nothing had happened. But some things don't fade. Dean Martin knew it the moment his manager told him, "Vinny Martell's back in town, staying at the Stardust." The suggestion came quickly. "Maybe avoid places where he might be." Dean shook his head. "I'm not avoiding anyone." 2 nights later, Dean was at the Stardust restaurant, laughing over dinner with Sammy Davis Jr. and Joey Bishop. The kind of easy laughter that only came when you'd survived enough years together to trust the silence between jokes. A waiter approached carefully. "Mr. Martin, Mr. Martell would like to speak with you." The table went still. Sammy leaned forward. "You don't have to go." Dean stood. "I'll be right back." In a private booth at the back of the restaurant, Vinny sat alone. No entourage, no posturing, just a drink and a tired face. "Dean," Vinny said, "thanks for coming over." Dean didn't sit. "What do you want?" "To apologize, properly." Dean studied him. This wasn't the man from 6 months earlier. The swagger was muted, the arrogance worn down by time or reflection. "Why?" Dean asked. Vinny exhaled slowly. "Because what I said about your brother was wrong, cruel, and I've thought about it more than I expected to." Dean waited. "I lost a brother too," Vinny continued. "Long time ago. Younger than me. Killed in a robbery." His voice softened. "When he died, it left a hole. People said stupid things, and I wanted to hurt them for it." Dean felt something shift. "That's probably how you felt," Vinny said, "when I opened my mouth." "It is," Dean replied. "I was testing you," Vinny admitted, "seeing how far I could push. That's how men like me survive, by seeing who breaks." He looked up. "You didn't." Dean sat down. Vinny swallowed. "I don't want to be remembered as a man who mocked the dead. I've done enough wrong things. I don't want that to be one of them." There was no angle, no leverage, just regret. Dean spoke quietly. "Bill was the best man I ever knew. He was proud of me. Always. There was no jealousy." "I believe you," Vinny said, "and I'm sorry I made you defend something that never should have been questioned." Dean studied him for a long moment. "Apology accepted." Relief crossed Vinny's face, but Dean added one last line. "If you ever mention my family again—" "I won't," Vinny said immediately. "You have my word." That night, Dean returned to the table. Sammy raised an eyebrow. "He mean it this time?" Dean thought for a moment. "Yeah, I think he does." Years later, in 1976, Dean was performing at the MGM Grand when he heard Vinny was in the audience again. Older now, slower, grayer. This time, Dean had him brought backstage. They talked about nothing important. The weather, the changes in Vegas, old casinos disappearing. As Vinny was leaving, he paused. "What happened back in '68, he said, changed me." Dean listened. "You showed me what real strength looks like," Vinny continued. "Not power, not fear. Principles." When Vinny died in 1982, Dean received a letter, written in advance. "Thank you for showing me honor. Your brother Bill would be proud of you." Dean folded the letter and placed it beside a photograph of Bill, standing in front of their father's barber shop, young and smiling. "I defended you," Dean whispered, "the way you always defended me." Years passed. Las Vegas changed its face again and again. Old casinos torn down, new towers rising where history once stood. Names faded, power shifted. Men who once seemed untouchable disappeared quietly, replaced by others who believed they were permanent. But some moments refused to vanish. When Vincent Martell died in 1982, Dean Martin received a letter in the mail. It had been written before Vinny's death, sealed with instructions to send it only after he was gone. Dean sat alone at his desk when he opened it. The words inside weren't long. They didn't need to be. Vinny thanked him for the night at the desert inn, for forcing him to confront his own cruelty, for showing him what strength actually looked like. Not intimidation, not power, but principle. The courage to defend someone who couldn't defend themselves. Your brother Bill would be proud of you, the letter said. Dean folded the page carefully and placed it in his drawer beside other personal mementos, things that mattered more than awards or contracts ever could. That night, he took out an old photograph of Bill. There he was, standing in front of their father's barber shop in Steubenville. Young, healthy, alive. A man who never wanted fame, never asked for recognition, but shaped the person his little brother became. I stood up for you, Dean said quietly to the photo. When someone tried to twist who you were, I didn't let them. Bill had been gone for 17 years by then, and still the loss felt fresh. The hole never closed. It never does when someone matters that much. That night in July 1968 was never really about a mob boss. It wasn't even about danger. It was about love. Dean could have stayed silent. He could have chosen safety over truth, convenience over principle. No one would have blamed him. In Vegas, silence was survival. But Dean didn't stay quiet. He demanded respect, not loudly, not violently, but unmovably. He stood in front of a powerful man and said, "This is where the line is. You don't cross it. That's why the story endured. Not because a mob boss was humbled, but because a brother refused to let another brother's memory be rewritten." Years later, after Dean's death in 1995, his family found photographs of Bill everywhere. In his home, his office, even on the refrigerator. His daughter Dina later said, "My father never stopped missing Uncle Bill, and if anyone disrespected his memory, my father became impossible to move." That was Dean Martin's true character. Not just the voice, not the charm, not the effortless cool, but loyalty, love, and the quiet courage to defend the people who mattered, especially when they were gone. That night in Vegas, Dean didn't raise his fists. He raised a standard, and everyone in that hallway felt it. Decades have passed since that night in July 1968. The Desert Inn is gone. The men who filled its showroom are gone. Even the power structures that once ruled Las Vegas have shifted into something quieter, harder to see. But the story remains, not because it involves the mob, not because a famous singer faced a dangerous man and walked away. It remains because of how it happened. When people retell the story, they often focus on the confrontation, the hallway, the cigar smoke, the threat, the apology. But that's only the surface. The real meaning lies beneath it. Dean Martin didn't win because he was stronger, louder, or more powerful. He won because he knew exactly who he was and what he would not allow. He didn't insult Vinny. He didn't escalate. He didn't lose control. He simply drew a line and refused to step back. That kind of strength is rare, especially in a world where power usually belongs to the most ruthless voice in the room. Dean showed that dignity, when held firmly enough, can be just as intimidating. And the reason he stood his ground wasn't ego. It wasn't pride. It was love. Bill Martin wasn't famous. He didn't leave behind recordings or headlines, but he left behind something quieter and far more powerful. A brother who would not allow his memory to be distorted, even by men who believed they were untouchable. That's why this story still resonates, because everyone understands that moment. The moment when someone you love can no longer speak for themselves, and the responsibility falls to you. Dean accepted that responsibility without hesitation. He didn't do it for applause. In fact, he worked hard to keep it out of the newspapers. He didn't want recognition. He wanted respect for Bill, not for himself. Years later, when people asked Dean about courage, he never pointed to that night. He didn't frame it as bravery. To him, it was simply what a brother does. That's the part that lasts. In the end, this story isn't about mob bosses or old Las Vegas. It's about something timeless, the quiet power of standing up for what matters, without anger, without fear, and without backing down. Dean Martin's calm response shocked everyone not because it was dramatic, but because it was unbreakable. And that is why, long after the lights of the strip have dimmed, this moment still defines him. Long after the applause faded, long after the neon lights of old Las Vegas went dark, what remained wasn't the confrontation, it was the choice. Dean Martin never told this story on talk shows. He never used it to polish his image. He didn't need the world to know what he had done, because the person he did it for was already gone. That night in 1968, Dean could have stayed silent. He could have laughed it off. He could have protected himself. Instead, he protected a memory. A brother who worked hard, loved his family, and never asked to be part of a legend. A man who couldn't speak anymore. So Dean spoke for him, and that is why this story still matters. Not because it involved danger, but because it revealed character. Real strength doesn't shout, it doesn't threaten, it doesn't need witnesses, it stands still, it speaks once, and it does not move. Dean Martin showed the world that night that loyalty doesn't end when someone dies. If anything, it becomes more important. You defend the people you love when they're alive, and you defend their name when they're gone. That was Dean's legacy. Not just the songs, not just the charm, but the quiet, unwavering courage to say, this is where the line is, and I will not step back. And sometimes, that's the strongest thing a person can do.